Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild DevOps Toolchain. Today, we'll be talking about Evan all about going from an individual contributor to engineering leadership and lessons learned from AI and a whole bunch more. Evan's a really interesting guy. He's done a lot. He's always switching between different types of almost seems like roles. So really excited to have his perspective here. If you don't know, he's an engineer that's currently focused on reliability, distributed systems, infrastructure, automation, security, pretty much everything. And he is a frequent contributor to the Test Guild podcast and Automation Guild conference. And really looking forward to catching up with him. You don't want to miss this episode? Check it out. Are you ready to level up your DevOps game and crush those quality challenges? Whether you're dealing with flaky tests, scaling automation, or trying to integrate security into your pipelines, we got something just for you. Introducing the DevOps Quality Testing Playbook from Test Guild. It isn't just another PDF. It's your go-to guide packed with actionable insights, best practices, and strategies to help you create a bulletproof DevOps toolchain. It's built specifically for engineers, testers, and DevOps teams who want to optimize their workflow and drive continuous quality throughout their pipelines. The best part? It's free and ready to download. So don't miss it. Head on over to testguild.me/DevOps book and grab your copy today. Stay ahead of the game, optimize your pipelines, and let's crush those quality challenges together. Hey, Evan, welcome to the Guild.
Hey, Joe. It's great to be back.
Great to have you. So, as I mentioned, you're always working on something new. And so you recently posted an idea for a new show on going from an IC to an engineering leadership type of role. So I thought maybe we'd start off there. Why did you go from, and when we say IC, it's individual contributor, to more of engineering leadership? I get asked questions all the time. How do I move into leadership or management? Is it the right thing for me? So maybe a little background. What led you there?
Sure. So I've been doing software for a while now, just in different tiers and levels and disciplines, I guess. It's so it is something I've done before. Like I think 2016, I took on a role of manager of quality, whatever we were calling the title back then. For me, it's a matter of it's switching between IC and management and leadership and all that. So more recently, I was given the opportunity to take on more of an engineering management role, across multiple disciplines. In this case, it's managing application security, infrastructure security, so like that realm, software quality as well, and then infrastructure in general. So that's something I'm doing. So given that, realistically, it was an interest to have more say, I guess, in the decisions, and be more part of the actual decision making. Because just being an IC is great. Once again, I was a manager, I was an IC, I was a manager again. Here I am again. It's one of those things where it doesn't mean I stopped writing code. It's not the case at all. But there's definitely more of an emphasis on process management and everything else. And I think the primary reason was just an interest of owning something, right? Like that's my interest, and owning the process, having a say in, approvals and these kinds of things. And then, the management of where we're going, the numbers of people and all of that realm, so that's really why.
Nice. So I assume when you first did this, I know you've gone back and forth. What are some of the biggest challenges you face when transitioning from maybe an individual contributor to leadership, and maybe how you overcame them?
Sure. So I think the first time was honestly probably time zone, if anything. Time zone was a big issue. That was like before, we had a bunch of remote workers, of course, spread across the world. That was probably one of the bigger issues. It was definitely time zones and, perfectly timing meetings and, scheduling out all of these different syncs that we had. And I say meetings, but realistically, like, we're trying to keep it, I don't know what the term is, like less meetings, more Confluence documentation kind of thing. Like if there's an idea, I create a Confluence doc, if it's an architecture, if it's, a new tool that we're using, a migration from another tool to a new tool, these kinds of things. And then I guess traveling to the location, right? So like I traveled I mean, I've traveled and worked with teams all, throughout the world at this point, but I think the first time, I want to say more so the second time I traveled, was just kind of setting a baseline of, these are kind of like the expectations of what we want to accomplish. And I think that was pretty great. But I think the second time I traveled to India, worked with some teams over there, still working with those teams actually. So it's been, we worked with these teams for 10 plus years now, which is rare to say, I guess in a lot of ways. So things have worked out quite well. But that was really it, just kind of like the management of, really just picking and choosing when we could meet, and then kind of a process around, how we can share these ideas more easily. Years ago, back then we were using a different tool. It wasn't Confluence at the time. So yeah, that was kind of like some of the difficulties. Of course, getting across the finish line was another thing. That was a whole different process. Finishing, individual projects versus being responsible for when those get over the finish line. That was a big issue. I mean, there's so many books you can read about that. I think one of the earlier ones that I read was, the Mythical Man Month, and just understanding how like a lot of, even everything from Scrum to, back in the day, my stuff that I was doing XP, at Pfizer way back in the day. So there's a lot of things I learned from him, a lot of things I had to pick up throughout the years, reading books and just hearing from people and just understanding, it's really one of the more challenging things I think of all time is estimation. So there's been so many processes wrapped around that, and, books and still to this day talks and whole agile conferences and whatnot. So for us, yeah, it was really understanding what worked for us. That was another, I think, major difficulty. You can't just say hey, I'm going to follow agile now, this flavor of that, Scrum, and, move forward with that. I think it was a little more difficult than anything, but yeah, those were some of the difficulties and, and some of the ideas of getting around those.
So did you feel that because you started off as an individual contributor, you kind of knew how things worked? Because a lot of times you get management hired as management and they don't necessarily understand the technical, but you understand the technical and maybe you don't understand the people. So did you see that as a benefit as starting off, maybe knowing the business and how things work before you became management or leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, I've worked with management. My first roles, for example, when I was 19, I left school and, got a job in software, and I remember a lot of, this was 2008, right? But I remember a lot of scenarios where, I had management that didn't quite understand the code. There's some difficulties there. And that's not a matter of not understanding the code, because nowadays, it's a lot different, right? You can quite literally copy and paste something into an LLM and understand it a bit more, and it helps you understand it, which is great. I think it's a good thing. It's helped me and it's helping other people. But back then, I think it was more of an issue of when we were stuck on a particular blocker or something like that, it was difficult to communicate that. And I think that was there's always an issue, and this was the first company I was at that, we ended up, things ended up getting better there and whatnot. But then I went to another company as a consultant, and then, you're an IC and you're dealing with, companies you're working with, all sorts of different companies and whatnot. And they don't understand kind of the technology behind it. So over the years, I've really, I think working as, working in QA, working in, software development, working in infrastructure now, over the years, it's been a matter of getting better and better at communicating what needs to be done and why. I think that's pretty important, not just doing it for the sake of doing it, or, falling down, which I've done before, falling down a rabbit hole and getting really interested in specific language. So, maybe I was interested in Crystal at one point, or maybe I was interested in Elixir and Phoenix. Yeah. So there's all these things that, you could fall down the rabbit hole. And I've been guilty of that, of course, before, particularly in 2018, 2019, pushing Kubernetes a little bit too early. That was, before we were ready for any of that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely over the years working in the industry, being hands-on, actually finishing the projects, doing the projects, committing the code, committing the infrastructure as code, potentially in Terraform. But yeah, I mean, that's been a big deal. Communicating that to stakeholders, to leadership, selling leadership on, ideas and goals, not just to use the technology, but to use it for business impact. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the big thing is that level of communication, particularly across the business is hugely impactful. Yeah, so that's
So what always stopped me from going into management, not necessarily leadership, because I did have some leadership roles, is having a staff or people reporting to me, because I control what I do. I don't want to have to worry about what someone else is going to do or say they're going to do. So, did you have any people skills or people management skills you need to learn that maybe was something that you weren't used to?
Whew. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, especially with me. I mean, I'm the problem. I mean, that's because yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's different terms for people, introvert, and all these,
Yeah,
all of these
totally.
different terms and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, I think Meetup helped me quite a bit. I mean, this is something I've run for quite some time now.
That's the
Since
Austin meetup.
yeah. So Austin, I mean, we haven't done anything in a little while. COVID definitely destroyed a lot of those good times without a doubt. But, we did one about, I think last year we did one. But getting, back in when did we start that? 2017. Even before that, right? Like before I started my own meetup, that really helped me with, the whole people skills thing. I know what is the movie? God, Office Space, I think it's called. Like, there's quotes from the Office Space, which are so funny because it definitely parallels to, I'm not a people person, all these kinds of things. Cause I wasn't a people person by any means. I think playing in a band helped, like playing in a band. Yeah. Playing in bands and touring, like the East Coast, a little bit the East Coast, like Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts and whatnot. Like I definitely have to do a YouTube video on that at some point, but like, I think that helped in terms of just, being out there, was a big piece of it. That was
So why is that? Because I was in a band that helped me not be afraid so much, because I would never get in front of people, but now I'm just, all right, I'm in front of people, kind of getting used to it.
Yeah, so it's like a combination of things like Meetup and playing in a band, but specifically with playing in a band, it was more so like the collaboration aspect of things. When you're sitting there writing music, it's big. It's just you have to collaborate. You're forced to collaborate. You can't just like isolate over in your own corner and let me write these lyrics out or let me write these notes out or tabs. So that was a big thing. Or even when like we were recording an EP or something, we had to communicate and understand how the DIY aspect of getting out there and finding venues to play with and collaboration with other bands and all of that. That was a big deal. So that helped me greatly, I think, because I was working in software and playing shows during the evening, which was quite fun. Now, I'm older, can't do that. I still have guitars and whatnot, but good times. And then on the Meetup side, Meetup helped as well because now, like, there's the band stuff, communicating with bands, the communication aspect of things, and now Meetup was, hey, you're communicating with other professionals in your industry, from totally different backgrounds, with what companies they're coming from and everything else and all of that. I think that was pretty impactful. So yeah, I mean, those two things really helped me the most, like get out of my shell. that was definitely a big part of all of it.
Yeah, good point about the band, because I used to be in a band, we did a lot of improvisation. So
Cool.
Relying on other people, building up your trust skills and also listening skills. Seems like a lot of people in this industry have music backgrounds. I guess that would transcend to managing a team, be able to trust your team, making sure you're listening to your team and being in sync with them probably would be really helpful as well, I would think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that. Yeah. I have friends that I played in bands with that ended up in software. So shout out to Joe. Yeah. Joe Tebow. Yeah. Another friend of mine. Nice. But that's funny. It's awesome.
So a lot of times people also, they just use like testing or entry level developing position just to get their foot in the door because they want to get into leadership and management for more money. So do you see that as a good enough reason to go into management? Or is that, I know different organizations sometimes have a technical track where you can make more money, not necessarily have to go into management to get there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's for me, it's a little bit different because I've only worked in startups for the most part. Like I've worked in small to medium sized companies pretty much my entire career at this point. I've even going outside of that, like I've helped other startups and helped, helped companies acquire other companies by reviewing their tech stack and everything else. Like there's a lot of that aspect of things. But like, as far as I know, a company I helped with the acquisition, those engineers, some of them went into leadership at the company at different large organizations. I can name, like Meta was one of them, for example. I noticed that they became a director of something, but that was the leadership track. So that was a pretty good, I guess, migration over there. And then the other one was another person who was a very unbelievably skilled engineer. I think there were like, there's different tiers at Meta. I think it was like L6, L5 or something. I don't entirely know the tier system over there, but I know they were hired on as a very high, quite high up. And I don't think they, in terms of financials and whatnot, I don't think they needed to go down the manager track. And it was more so like what they were interested in. And as a result, they built out a role for them. That's I guess it just really just depends on the organization and the skill set. But like for me particularly, of course, it was a matter of financial decision as well. It's like, hey, you could be an IC and stay at this rate basically, or you could go up to management and here's what your new rate's going to be. So that's definitely a part of it. It's just what it is. But I've definitely, as far as like small to medium sized companies, sometimes, really honestly, like sometimes you don't even see that track available at all. Like you just have a role you're hired into. Hey, you do 2 years here and do 2 years somewhere else. And, that's I've seen that, but I definitely am in a different situation where like I've grown with a company, this company I'm at now, to the point where like, these roles were like built out, to put me in these roles. So it, given the opportunity, like, hey, do you want to do this? So that's what the side I'm familiar with, but years and years and years of doing different roles led up to this, led up to more engineering leadership and being able to make the decisions. But yeah, it depends on the organization. But yeah, to your point though, like some of the large companies, they have entire, there's a website even, I'm sure I can't think of it right now, but I think it was a website somebody launched and it showed those levels, those different levels you can achieve at those larger organizations because it was more public, they're more public about that. So yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned this a little bit already, but if someone's an individual contributor, I think another fear they have is losing the technical chops.
Yeah.
But I guess it depends on the company. If you're small and medium, you're probably still doing both. But is that a real worry? And if so, like how do you overcome that to also make sure you are working on your technical skills at the same time as well?
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. I can think across, it's so common that it's talked about. I think for myself, right now I'm lucky enough to be able to still contribute to the code. That's definitely something I'm very much interested in doing. But it's definitely a balance, right? Like you have to. There's a percentage of it that you can do so much per day. And when I'm building out MVPs or architectural diagrams and basically putting on my solution engineering hat. There's all sorts of code that you write and whatnot. And just a couple days ago I did a demo. It's fairly frequent. So it really, once again, it depends on the role. Like I think, if you go into an organization like a large organization, I'm sure there's scenarios where like, you could probably, particularly like enterprise. I'm like, I don't want to call out any companies, but I definitely have seen the scenario where like, you can, and you will lose your, some, not all, just like not keeping up with like the latest trends and whatnot. And it's a good and bad thing. Like keeping up with the latest trends can definitely be bad. I've been burned by it before for sure. But it's definitely, I think for myself as well, like, I'm, if you have the time, like I have a family and everything else, like, there's definitely scenarios where, you have to, there's a life balance of all of this and you have to still have a life and everything else, like outside of just what you do every day. But I'm without a doubt, like definitely interested in building my own projects for fun. Like it's something I've always just been interested in just by doing, like I've just like, for example, like I'm building out some automation right now for a game that I played when I was a kid, right? Like just going back to the game and using Label Studio and identifying objects in that game to click, with Auto GUI. So like there's an interest you have to have, like, without a doubt. I think it's, but if you're a manager and you want to go back to IC, and if you have a core understanding of, caching and like, just computer science foundations and whatnot, like it's not going to be hugely difficult if you have a language under your belt, like it's not even like picking up a new language. I guess it depends on the paradigm, of course, like, if it's functional or, your entire background's in like object oriented languages and whatnot, but there's ways around it, like, and there's of course like, even apps now, what is, I don't know, Brilliant app or something like that. There's different apps. I like the language apps personally. Like I like Duolingo and whatnot, like understanding languages, but there's definitely apps out there like you can kind of maintain your skills, or YouTube or like there's just there's so much as far as resources that it's just about up to the individual to maintain those skills, and if they want to switch back and like get deeper into it, like, hey, build out a couple projects, get up to speed and whatnot. So I think we're at a point, especially with LLMs, like, I mean, we're at a point right now where like, if you don't do the manager track and just be a lead for quite some time, and get back into IC if you want, if you want to. I'm looking at you, Amazon. I think Amazon just recently mentioned they want to re-architect their roles more like a startup kind of, which is interesting. It's a whole other topic, but anyways, they want more ICs is the point. Like, but they're going to get lead ICs. It's going to be they're going to go through some strange times. But if you can use LLMs to practice new languages. For example, if I haven't worked with Ruby since 2014, I could go to an LLM and talk to it about getting back up to speed with Ruby. Is Ruby still using Capybara?
Right.
All of these things you could just ask and work with and build out MVPs and whatnot. So yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if this is a legitimate concern or not, just because I'm older and I work for my own business. But
Sure.
as you get older, do you think there's a perception like you need to get into management? Because who's going to hire a 53-year-old coder,
Right.
As an individual contributor? I don't even know if it's a real concern, but like I'm saying, that's a lot of people seem to be concerned about that as they get older.
I can't speak to it personally. Like I haven't seen that quite yet, and I've been at the same company for a long time at this point, so like I can't speak directly to it. But I've for sure, like I've read about it in the industry. Like I think just in general, like even outside of this industry, like it's a thing. Yeah, I mean, I like I said, it's using my stepdad as an example. He worked with Java. Back then, he was working with JSP, NetBeans, struts. I mean, I don't know how I remember this stuff. I was a kid at the time, but like he moved on to more director type roles and more specifically like outside of tech. So like there's definitely like, I mean, there's different parts of this industry at this point where like, you can work in a technology company that's like Meta or like Google, or you could work in a company that he chose, which was a university, like or like a factory, like, right. If you're like C++ and, if you're an older individual, you could write C++ for industrial machines in some dusty warehouse, like, and it's, it just depends on what your pay requirements are. There's a lot more to it, of course. But yeah, I think I haven't personally experienced, can't speak to it too much. I think there's definitely scenarios where that is the case. Maybe I've definitely talked to a bunch of people at meetups who are much older than I am, who are unbelievably brilliant, that are just in the industry. Like that's that's what they do. So yeah, I mean, it just depends. There's so many different situations that are involved with that. I mean, I just read about there's like a distinguished engineer at Amazon. I forgot his name, but like I'm sure a lot of people know this person. He like him and his wife just ride around in a boat like that's where they live apparently. And yeah, and he's like a distinguished engineer. I mean, he's done unbelievably like groundbreaking work. Like I can't even begin to imagine like some of the impact of that. I mean, I've worked with EC2 and all that kind of stuff, but like not to any of that level, but like it's kind of amazing. So I guess it really, it's all situational at the end of the day. But my personal experience is through family, working through the industry and whatnot, and like going to different, going outside of deeper tech into university roles and
right.
That kind of thing. So yeah.
Nice. All right, so you mentioned LLMs, AI a lot, and a lot of people think of it in the context of coding, but you mentioned something early on that was interesting. You said you were using it to help with management in a sense. Did I hear that correctly? And if so, can you give some other examples? Because I think a lot of people don't use it for other things without knowing what it can do.
Right. So like I guess not management necessarily. This is more it's tough to, not management necessarily, more so like process, I guess. So like there's a lot of work that I had to do. I mean, over the last like 3 years, like when I was in like the more SRE type role, like incident response type roles, like there was like this process of creating run books, and like we had to manually create these in Confluence, and eventually, and then attach them to an alert. Like in our case, we're using an observability platform to attach them to an alert. And that's a lot of work, right? Like that's a process we had to build. Like we had like the on-call stuff's totally different, like that's totally different thing. But like, this is just the runbook piece where like we're looking at using KGPT to basically sit in our Kubernetes cluster as an operator and basically just be queryable. Like, of course, we're going to anonymize the backend data, so it's not sending back all of our secrets and like all of that type of data, which is pretty cool. It's a really cool project for anyone to check out. Like it's an open source project. So like, instead of like using runbooks as like a design doc to eventually create automation around it, which is still a thing we can do, I wanted to really use KGPT just for the sake of just, hey, we have these runbooks, let's replace these runbooks with KGPT, call it a day, that kind of thing. Like in the feedback, I did a demo on that. I think maybe like 4 weeks ago now, like maybe 5 weeks ago, about a month and a week, I guess. But the reception was really good. Like the team was pretty pumped about that because, I mean, honestly, writing runbooks is, I look for the more mundane stuff, like, and especially even on the test side, right? Like, like the other thing I'm looking at, potentially over the next few months, maybe Q4, is something I'm going to personally look into is like test case creation, right? Like, we still, at the end of the day, we have a bunch of automated tests. We have a bunch of automated end tests, and, that's great. Sure. But the problem is, we still have to have, there's still some level of exploratory testing we have to have. It's just what it is. Like we use exploratory testing to like build out automation and all that kind of thing, just by like walking through a service and application UI, then identifying areas of automation that we could do, that we write in. But like, definitely the test creation, case creation itself, I want to take a Jira story and, have an LM build tests around that. And then just maybe like populate them automatically in Zephyr or something. So that's something I'm looking into. But like those are the things I'm looking at, as far as like AI and where it's applicable and stuff like that. Because I mean, personally, I've had really, really bad experience building out projects in AI. Some good, some bad, mostly bad. I mean, I wasn't writing it. Let's say I'll give you a direct example, right? So I was writing a service in a PowerShell, and then all this was doing was just taking data that existed on multiple instances and then aggregating that data and pushing it to like a Samba server, and then basically taking that data and then ingesting it into an observability tool that was like custom built. That was like definitely over the top, but like this was this is a project that had to be done, and it was very bad at writing PowerShell, very bad at the specifics, very, very, very bad. So that was interesting. And then more recently, like a personal project was, as I mentioned to you, just, automating a game that I used to play as a kid, right? Like it's just a fun thing for me to do. Like I go back to this game. Oh, it's a game called RuneScape. But it's a personal server, so it's not impacting anyone on the, like, people are not going to be happy when I just said this. But it's a personal, it's on my local machine, so it's a server, literally a local server that I'm running of the game, because the source was never released. Keep in mind, this was a group of people who are very much smarter than I am, like ended up like doing reverse engineering many years ago and took the original source and, used Java reflection and did a bunch of really cool stuff to get that information. And they built out, multiple, multiple versions of it, but I have a version on my local machine that I'm running. And I just, it's always been a fascination of mine, because that's part of what got me into automation as a kid, when I was probably 15. I probably Pascal. So it was a service that sat over this game, and you could write Pascal to automate the game. That it was very fun. Not once again, not very ethical in ways. The game was that version of the game was dying at the time, so a lot more people were doing this. But anyways, the thing that I'm doing now, taking the Python, writing PyAuto GUI and just using an LM to work through the process of, particularly on the object side, and identify the objects and everything else. And it's not ideal. I think it's getting better. I think with the most recent release, at least like with OpenAI, and I think that's a 0.01 preview, for example. But in any case, that's my recent. I mean, over the past 2 years, I've been using it for these kinds of things, and the team as well. Like, hey, if the team can figure out, like something that it can help with, by all means, like we're not afraid to use this tool. It's just, well, yet again, it's like, I love GitHub Copilot because, they had the right idea for a name, Copilot, because it's not doing the work. Like there's never a scenario where I can have an LM write me an application to deploy to infrastructure right now. It's just not a possibility at the moment. Maybe at some point, it's possible, but right now it's like not there.
All right, so I'm an introvert, and maybe this is psychological. I use ChatGPT for everything. I for some reason freeze up with emails sometimes, coming up with ideas of how to answer someone, or even irate comments on my YouTube channel. So I'll just ask ChatGPT, "Hey, I just got this comment. How would you respond?" And it just helps me. I take it and I modify it, obviously, but it helps as a good starting point. So I can see how you could do that with management if you have someone ask you weird requests that you don't know, you've never dealt with before. Like, what are some options I can give them?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see that as well. But yeah, I think there's definitely an infamous person on the internet, Levels. I think Peter Levels. But he created a tool. I think it was like Psychologist AI or something like that. I don't know how well it's doing. Yeah. This person is like, the reason why they're infamous for like building like all of these, like a bunch of bootstrap startups, which I think is interesting because the company I'm currently at is bootstrapped. Like it's, we didn't go through, VC funds and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So like, I just always thought it was pretty interesting, but in any case, yeah, people are trying, they're trying like that human level of AI and whatnot, but it's like, it's tough. Like that's a tough one.
Yeah. But what I've also seen is teams using their own chatbot with the LLM to talk about, hey, here's what I did today, here's what I did today, and the manager can just query, like it's in-house trained on that chatbot for their information, so that it's able to know where everyone's working on. It just makes it better to manage projects. I've seen that work as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one. That's something we looked at in the past, a couple years back. I think it was even before like the whole LLM like thing was. It was a chatbot. Chatbots. Yeah, I mean we had chatbots at the company for a while now. Dialogflow, using all that. But I think more specifically in Slack, we used it for a little bit. It did not take off, by the way.
No, really.
It was so we used the bot. It was I think Agile bot or something like that, where like you do your stand up bot, like you could basically like say like what you're doing every day. Like we don't do daily stand ups. Like we don't do that. Like we know what we're working on per sprint and everything else. Like there's no point in doing some of these rituals, but like for their teams, yes, but for us, no. But like, yeah, that did not work. That was like a no.
Good to know.
Yeah, for anyone out there.
So I also have in my notes something about, I never heard this term before actually, ZIRP, ZIRP. You wanted to cover. What the heck what is that?
Yeah, it's all like, it's just in terms of management and like what Amazon's doing and just all the talk in the industry right now, like for the past couple of years. We had great, like there's been like these amazing waves, like back when my family was working in tech, like 99, like you had the 99 crash and there's a great book called, I don't know if it's called After Companies. It's Philip Kaplan, great book, worth checking out. Definitely worth checking out. It's like pets.com and like, the history and everything else. So like, I love the history of technology. Like I'm huge nerd about like the old tech. But anyways, ZIRP is all macroeconomics, right? Like zero interest rate policy. Basically that free money guy wearing a question mark suit on late night infomercials in the 90s. Right? Like
that's what I'm turning into, it feels like. Yeah. For the test guild. Hey everybody.
Hey, no, that's awesome. That's pretty cool. So what's neat about that is like, neat, good and bad, but like it was just ultimately like for years, right? Like there's access to cheap capital, right? Like spiking hiring frenzies. So like, on the management side, like wanted to kind of discuss it because it's like, what you're seeing in the industry right now, like you see hire freezes and, all these things, right? Like I remember Meta, Google, Amazon reaching out to me for work, right? Like, and they're like, hey, you should work here. Like, and all, the whole spiel. I probably would have been laid off, but it's like, right. Like it's not, yeah, it's tough. So like that's a difficulty thing, but like it's worth mentioning because one, the interest rates yesterday, like I guess they kind of touched them up a bit, which is a good thing, good and bad, but like it's good because now like hiring might pick up again for people who are like looking to get into the industry. But I think this is more so for people like who aren't familiar like with why, like, is tech dead? Is AI taking jobs? That kind of thing. I think it's like, I haven't personally seen, like AI taking roles. Like I see it more so it augments teams. Maybe it can make teams much, much smaller. Like I've always worked in small, very scrappy teams that we just, I mean, this is what we do. We go in, we get work done, and that's basically it. Like that's, my first role, like we had a Pizza Friday, like every once in a rare while, we were lucky and blessed for this Pizza Friday. Like there weren't, there weren't like options and stuff like that ever, right? Like it was it was not, tech was not fun for a long time. Like I'm sure you're familiar with this. Like back in the day, it was like, there's no ball pits and everything else. Like it was not ideal, not fun. But getting back to the point, like I think if people are interested in getting into technology, I mean, potentially don't look at the tech companies. Obviously there's financial incentive there, like real life changing financial incentive, like no doubt about it. But then also if you're interested in tech and just getting into tech or just getting in the door, maybe choose a boring industry, like that's something that's a possibility as well. So if you're interested in like stability versus high pay and, like I said, it's one of those things that like, because of like the larger issues, we're seeing right now or over the past couple of years, just with like, startups and all the whole financial aspect of things, right? Like maybe choose a boring industry. That might be a ticket worth looking at, as far as getting into tech is concerned. Because when I was getting into tech, like I definitely, like 2008 happened. That was my like .com boom, right? Like, or whatever they call it. So that was like my issue. Because like I was speaking of the band, I was at that company with a friend of mine that played bass for us for a show that filled in one time. So that was, but in any case, what ended up happening was that company went under because we were basically building the Wix of real estate. And in 2008, of course, like that crashed and the real estate market crashed. And we had an angel investor at the time. And like, that was it. So that was like my experience. And then after that, I was like, all right, let me, that was TechCrunch. We did all the fun stuff, like anyways, but like, after that, I was like, all right, how can I just like stay in a role? Like, and then I just chose like a boring consulting company and worked there for like a year before I joined my current organization. So that's like some potential advice. If anyone's listening to this, wanted to break into tech, like these are ways to do it. These are ways to get around, the nonsense you're seeing on the academic side right now. So, yep.
Great advice. Kevin, before we go, is there one piece of actual advice you can give to someone to help them with their leadership, management type of movement roles, moving into that role, and what's the best way to find or contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely like as far as like, ultimately do what you want to do. Don't listen to me, but that's the end of the day. But if you're interested in getting into more of a lead role, the resource, I mean, there's so many resources out there. Like I would definitely say like, please check out Charity Major's blog. I think it's on IC to Manager. There's one back in like 2017 that's just unbelievably good. The Phoenix Project, read the Phoenix Project. Use Audible. Like if you're doing the dishes like I do, or like, whatever chore you're doing, like listen to Audible, like throw on the Phoenix Project, throw on the goal, like, read about Toyota Kanban, understand, what your goal is and what you're trying to do, as a people manager, as a process manager. There's other good books like The Making of a Manager, The Manager's Path, An Elegant Puzzle, Systems of Engineering Management. Like a lot of these they're definitely, they don't read a million books, but like pick and choose what you want to read and then be able to digest it, however you want to, whether that's through an actual book or through an audiobook. Definitely get in there and, understand these things, if you don't, and then use an LLM, talk about it. Hey, talk about the book, the team topologies, what are the points from this book? What can I learn from this book? That kind of thing. Making work visible, accelerate. Like there's a bunch of really solid books out there, and use an LLM, talk about that book, understand it, read the blogs, just dive in and understand how you're going to make an impact as a technical lead or manager. So, yep. And then as far as finding me, YouTube these days, I know I have a big video I'm about to release. So find me on Random Thoughts Tech at YouTube. There's a whole bunch of different videos on there. There's a lot more videos I need to do on there, but other than that, that's mostly where people can find me these days.
And for links of everything of value we covered in this DevOps Toolchain show, head on over to testguild.com/P172. So that's it for this episode of the DevOps Toolchain show. I'm Joe. My mission is to help you succeed creating end-to-end full-stack DevOps Toolchain awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers. Hey, thank you for tuning in. It's incredible to connect with close to 400,000 followers across all our platforms and over 40,000 email subscribers who are at the forefront of automation, testing, and DevOps. If you haven't yet, join our vibrant community at testguild.com, where you become part of our elite circle driving innovation in software testing and automation. And if you're a tool provider or have a service looking to empower our guild with solutions that elevate skills and tackle real-world challenges, we're excited to collaborate. Visit testguild.info to explore how we can create transformative experiences together. Let's push the boundaries of what we can achieve.
The Test Guild Automation Testing Podcast. With lutes and lyres the bards began their song. A tune of knowledge, a melody of code. Through the air it spread like wildfire through the land, guiding testers, showing the secrets to behold.